The men who study the heavens know a truth the rest of us would rather leave alone. The light of a star is old light. What falls upon your upturned face on a clear night is not the star as it burns now, but the star as it burned long ago, a message flung across a distance so vast that the hand which sent it may have gone cold and dark 1,000 years before the word arrives. To stand beneath the night sky is to stand inside a patient and enormous keeping of faith. Every point of light above the rooftops is a promise made in some unimaginable past and honored, exactly, on this precise night, over a country that has long since forgotten how to honor anything at all. For the world below the sky keeps no such faith. The world below keeps a short account. It remembers a woman only so long as she is useful, or fortunate, or lovely, and forgets her the very hour she is none of these. A name may be the whole talk of a season passed from mouth to mouth like a bright coin, and by the next season that same name is a thing no one will say aloud as though the saying might soil the lips. The heavens will spend 1,000 years being faithful to a single vow. A ballroom will not trouble to be faithful across one short winter. And of all the things the world below forgets most gladly, none is forgotten so gladly as a promise made to someone who has since fallen. This is the story of a promise made under one particular star to one particular woman, and of the man who looked into her face and swore that he did not remember it, and of the cold church, 1 year after, where he sat and watched her brought to the side of another man at the altar. He, of all the men in England, for there was one thing every living soul knew about the Duke of Eldermere. He never forgot anything. On a raw gray morning at the very end of winter, a young woman stood at the tradesman's door of a tall house in a good part of London and waited to be told, once again, that there was no place for her. She was 21. 2 years before, she would have gone in at the front. Now she stood at the side door, with her back straight and her hands folded, and kept her face still while the woman on the step read her letter of character a second time and arrived, as they all arrived, at the name. Verena watched it happen. The reading face, mildly kind for the letter, was a good one, and the hand, a lady's. Then the eyes reaching the name at the foot of the page, and the small closing of the features, the faint step back, as from a thing that might carry fever. Ellery, the housekeeper said, and looked up. Verena Ellery, of Larkfield. The Ellery that was in all the papers. Yes, said Verena. There was nothing to be won by saying otherwise, and she had long since given up trying to win anything at all by lying. That was my father. The letter came back through the gap in the door, folded now, held at arm's length as though it had grown warm and unpleasant to hold. The position is filled, the woman said, which it was not, for she had advertised it that very morning. I would not go on to the other houses in the square, miss. It will be the same at each. There is nothing in this city for that name, and there will not be. Try the north, where they read fewer papers. Good morning. The door closed. It closed gently, which was the worse for it, since gentleness meant the woman felt no anger, only distaste, and a small pity she did not care to spend. Verena stood a moment on the cold step. Then she went back up into the street, and she did the thing she always did now, when the ground seemed to tilt beneath her. She slipped one hand into her glove, to the folded square of cards she had carried there since that last summer, and pressed her thumb to it until the worst of the tilting passed. She knew every line drawn upon it by heart, as she knew the hand that had drawn them. It was the last thing she owned that was worth the owning, and she would sooner have starved, and very nearly had, than sell it. She had very little money left. She had sold, the month before, the last of her mother's things worth the selling, to a man who understood to the farthing how little she could refuse him. She was near the end of something, and she knew it, and the knowing was strangely quiet, the way the deepest cold is quiet. To understand how the daughter of Larkfield came to stand refused at a stranger's side door, her thumb pressed to a hidden card in a gray street. You must go back the better part of 2 years. Back to a warm night at the height of summer, when Verena Ellery still had a father living, a home she loved, and a name that opened doors rather than closing them, and a promise made to her under the stars by the one man in England who never forgot a single thing. Larkfield was a low, old house of pale stone in a green fold of Wiltshire. And the best thing about it, in the opinion of its master, was the tower. Sir Rowland Ellery was a baronet of small fortune, and no ambition beyond the one that had ruled his gentle life, which was to understand the sky. He had built, at the cost of very nearly all he had, a little observatory upon the old tower, and there he passed his nights among his instruments, a mild and happy and wholly distracted man, while his 2 daughters grew up half wild and entirely loved beneath him. It was the sky that first brought the Duke of Eldermere to Larkfield. He was young for a duke, newly come to the title, and he had one interest the great world found unaccountable in a man of his rank, which was the very same as Sir Rowland's. He had read a paper the baronet wrote upon the motion of a certain comet, and had written to him, and out of that grew a correspondence, and then, across 3 summers of visits, a friendship the county could never have accounted for when the Duke came to sit in the cold tower in the small hours, he came also to know the baronet's elder daughter. Verena was 19 that last summer. She had grown up handing her father his instruments in the dark, and knew the night sky the way other young women knew the figures of a dance, because she was not shy of the quiet, watchful young man who shared the tower and did not flatter him, and told him plainly when he was wrong, and just as plainly when he was right. He did with her the thing he had never once learned to do with anyone else. He talked. That was the truth the world would never have credited of the Duke of Eldermere, known everywhere for a cold and guarded man who gave nothing away. In that tower he was only a young man beside a young woman, naming the stars for her, hearing her name them back, and falling, without either of them marking the hour, wholly in love. He told her once that his memory was a strange gift, and a heavy one, that he forgot nothing, not a face, nor a page, nor a wrong done him, nor a kindness, that his whole life was stored in him entire, and would not fade as other people's did. He said it the way a man confesses a burden. And Verena, 19 and unafraid, told him she thought it a fine thing to be loved by a man who could not forget, for whatever he promised her he would carry to the end of his days. He was silent a long while. Then he took a card from his pocket, and by the glow of the shuttered lantern drew for her, in his exact upright hand, a small map of that night sky, and marked 1 star upon it brighter than the rest. Vega, high in the summer dark, the first bright star of the evening. He gave her the card and made her the promise that whatever came he would marry her, and cared nothing for her fortune nor the smallness of her name beside his own, and would speak to her father before the year was out. She kept the card. She would keep it long after all else was lost. The year did not go as the promise supposed. That autumn a man of business came into Sir Rowland's unworldly life with a scheme that could not fail and neat figures to prove it, and the baronet, who understood the heavens far better than men, believed him, and worse, vouched for the man to his neighbors, who put in their money on the strength of his good name. Within 1 black week the scheme failed, as such schemes are built to fail, and the money was gone, his own and every shilling his good name had gathered, and the man of business with it. Sir Rowland was no thief, but a ruined man who has lost other men's money, looks a great deal like one, and the world does not trouble to tell the two apart. He lived just long enough to see Larkfield sold over his head, and his daughters left with nothing. And then, one gray morning at the turning of the year, his gentle heart simply stopped, up in the tower among his charts. Verena knew he had died of the shame of it, though no physician would ever set such a cause to paper. She was alone then, but for a younger sister and a card with a star drawn upon it. And so, when the worst was done and the house was gone, Verena Ellery did the last thing left that she still believed in. She took up her father's honest name and the Duke's given word and went to Eldermere, to the one man in England who had sworn to her that he would never forget. Eldermere's seat was a great grey house called Winclear, set high and alone above the moors of Northumberland, with a tower at its northern corner that Verena knew, without being told, must be his observatory. She had come the last miles on foot, the coach fare having taken nearly all she had, walking up out of the valley in a thin, cold rain. And so she stood at last in the wide, cold hall of the man who had promised to marry her, in a morning gown gone grey at the hems, her boots ruined with mud, her father not 3 weeks in the ground. She had rehearsed nothing on the long road north. She had believed that when she saw him, the words would come of themselves, because they were true, and because he, of all men, would remember every one of them. He came down the great stair to her, and he was changed, not in his face, which was the face she had loved in the tower, but in the whole set of him, the coldness he wore now like a coat buttoned to the throat. There were 2 others in the hall, a grave older man she took for his steward, and a lady in traveling dress who had risen from a bench to watch. Verena did not care who saw. She had eyes for him alone. "You know why I have come," she said, and her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "My father is dead. Larkfield is sold. I have nothing left in the world but a younger sister and your given word. Under the summer stars you told me that, whatever came, you would marry me. I have come to hold you to it. I have come to be your wife." For a long moment he only looked at her. Into that look she poured all the hope she had left, for it was the look of a man upon the very edge of speech, and she waited for the warmth to break across his face, as it had broken 100 times in the tower at Larkfield. It did not break. "I am sorry," he said at last, "that you have come so far." His voice was level and quiet, and altogether a stranger's. "But I think you have mistaken the house. I have made no such promise. I do not know what summer you mean." The hall seemed to sway about her. She reached for the thing that could not be mistaken. "The tower at Larkfield," she said. "My father's observatory. You came to us 3 summers. You named the stars with me in the dark. You drew me a map of the sky with your own hand, and marked one star upon it brighter than the rest, and you gave it to me, and made me your promise. Vega, you cannot have forgotten it. You forget nothing. There is not a soul in England who does not know that you forget nothing." Something moved, far back in his eyes, and was gone. She took 1 step nearer to him, near enough now to see the pulse going hard at his throat, near enough to speak low, so that the strangers along the wall might not catch it. "You told me once that a man who could not forget was the safest man in the world to love, for he would carry every word he had given to the end of his days. You said it on the last night of that last summer, with your hand laid over mine. So look at me now, and tell me plainly that you do not know my face, and I will go, and never trouble you again so long as I live. Only say it plainly." "I am afraid," said the Duke of Eldermere, "that whatever you believe you recall, I do not remember any promise. I do not remember you at all." Behind her, she heard the small, indrawn breath of the lady, by the bench the very sound of a story being born, and she understood, even in the ruin of that moment, exactly what it would mean. By the week's end, it would be in every drawing-room, between the moors and London. The swindler's daughter had gone north, and thrown herself upon the Duke of Eldermere, claiming a promise he had never made, and the Duke had looked at her as at a stranger and turned her from his door. There is no swifter road to ruin for a woman than to be named a liar and a fortune hunter in a single breath, and Verena had walked the whole length of it in under a minute. She did not weep. She would be glad of that, afterward. She gathered up what was left of herself, and made him a curtsy, low and correct as though he were no more than the world believed him. Then, as she turned to go, she saw it. His gaze dropped, once for less than the space of a heartbeat, to her gloved right hand where it lay pressed flat against her side. to the exact place where, folded small beneath the kid leather, she carried the card with the star upon it. He could not have known it was there. She had not shown it. She had shown him nothing at all. And yet his eyes went to it as surely as the needle swings to the north, and then came away, and his face closed over it like water over a dropped stone. She told herself, on the long, cold road south, that she had imagined it. She went on telling herself so for a year. She was wrong, but it would be a long while yet before she learned how wrong she was and what it had cost him to look away. The year that came after taught Verena the true and exact weight of the word ruin, which she had never properly understood while she still had something left to lose. She had placed her sister Perdita, who was but 15, with a second cousin in Bath, a cold and grudging woman who made it plain from the first hour that the girl was a charity and would be reminded of it daily. For that one roof over Perdita's head, Verena would have done nearly anything. It was the thought of her sister, far more than her own hunger, that carried her from door to door across that long gray year, asking only for some honest place and being refused the instant her name was read aloud. She learned, in that year, the whole cold geography of falling. She learned which pawnbrokers would deal gently and which would not, and the look that came over the face of a woman who had once dined at her father's table and now crossed to the far side of the street sooner than be seen to know her. She sold her mother's garnets, and then her workbox, and then the good gray winter cloak, and kept warm as best she could after. She took a bare room above a chandler's shop and paid for it by copying letters and mending lace. And when that was not enough, she went without, quietly, in the way that leaves no mark a stranger can read. Through all of it, she kept the one small card with the star drawn upon it folded in her glove, and did not sell it, though there were nights she was hungry enough to weigh it in her hand and think. So when the letter came, she did not at first believe it. It was written in a bold, old-fashioned hand, and it was signed by a Lady Honoria Vane, who named herself, without apology, great-aunt to the Duke of Eldermere. That name struck Verena like a hand laid flat across the face. She very nearly put the letter into the fire, unread. That she did not was owed entirely to the fact that she had eaten nothing at all that day, and a woman who has not eaten cannot always afford the luxury of her pride. Lady Honoria received her, 3 days later, in a small, warm room crowded with books and a great many cats, and she proved to be the oldest, straightest, and most alarming woman Verena had ever stood before. She looked her visitor slowly up and down with a pair of black eyes that plainly missed nothing in this world. "So," she said, "you are Roland Ellery's girl. Sit down before you fall down. You have the look of a woman who has been too proud to eat, which is the most foolish kind of pride there is." She rang, and food was brought, more than Verena had seen upon a single table in a 12-month, and she watched her visitor try and fail not to fall upon it too quickly. She did not look away nor pretend to be busy elsewhere, which Verena had learned was the particular cruelty of the kind. She only watched, steadily, as though a hungry gentlewoman at her table were no shameful thing at all. And in truth, it was not. Something in the old face softened by a very little. "I knew your father," she said when the plate was clean. "Not well, but enough. He was a fool about money, as clever men so often are, but he was no cheat, and I have never once cared in my life what the newspapers choose to print. I am old, and I am rich, and I am bored past bearing, and I want a companion with a brain in her head, who will read to me and quarrel with me and never simper. You will do. The place is yours, if you have the sense to take it." Verena said, as carefully as she could, that she did not understand why a lady of the Duke of Eldermere's own blood would take into her house the very woman that same Duke had named a liar before witnesses. Something crossed the old woman's face, then quick and hard as a blade turning. "My great-nephew Lucian," she said, "is a matter you and I shall come to in our own time. I will tell you only this much of him tonight. I have known that boy since the hour he was born. I knew him when he was the most truthful child in all England, a child who could no more forget a thing than he could stop the beating of his own heart, and who would sooner have gone into the ground than break a word he had given. When a man made like that stands up before witnesses and swears he does not remember, I do not call him a liar. I ask instead what has frightened him so badly that he would rather the whole world thought him one. I have been asking it for a year, and I mean, before I die, to have my answer. Verena sat very still. For a year she had believed herself the only creature living who found the thing impossible. To hear her own disbelief spoken back to her in that hard old voice undid something in her chest that she had thought safely closed. She took the place. Of course, she took it. She had a sister in Bath upon sufferance and no other road left open in the world. They set out within the week. It was only when the carriage had carried them a full day, and more to the north, and the soft green country gave way to something wild and high and cold, the few trees leaning all one way from the wind, that a dreadful suspicion woke in her, and she asked Lady Honoria, as lightly as she could, where they were going. "To my own house," said the old woman, "comfortable as a cat in the sun, which sits within the park of my great-nephew's seat. There is a fine tower there, that you will like. He never goes up to it now, though. It was the whole joy of his life once. Wincler, the place is called." And Verena Ellery understood that the single kindness she had been shown in a year was carrying her, mile by cold mile, straight back to the door of the man who had broken her. Lady Honoria's house was a handsome dower house of the same grey stone as the great one, set within the same wide park, so that from the window of the room she was given, Verena could see across half a mile of ancient trees, the north front of Wincler, and the dark shape of the tower against the sky. She did not believe she could bear to look at it. She found, across the first days, that she could not make herself stop. The work itself was the first true ease she had known in a year. Lady Honoria was exacting and sharp and wholly without patience for weakness of the self-pitying kind, and Verena, who had lately had a surfeit of pity, loved her for it inside a week. She read to her, and quarreled with her over what she read, and slept in a warm bed, and began, very slowly, to recall that she had once been a person and not merely a disgrace with a name. She met the Duke again on the 4th day. He came to call upon his great-aunt, as it seemed he did most weeks, and found Verena in the room with her. He stopped in the doorway. For the space of a single breath the mask was not quite settled into place, and beneath it she saw a thing that might have been pain, or might have been only her own foolish wishing. Then it was gone, and he bowed to her precisely as a man bows to a stranger of no consequence, and said, "Miss Ellery," in a voice with nothing in it, and turned to his aunt. She curtsied. She said not one word. She had promised herself, on the long road south a year before, that she would never again spend a single word of hers upon him, and she meant to keep that one small promise at the least, since he had kept not a single one of his own. He stayed only the length of a short and proper call, and spoke of the weather and the state of the roads and his aunt's health, and did not once let his eyes come back to the corner where Verena sat with her book. And the not looking was so complete, so careful, so plainly labored over, that a stranger watching might almost have mistaken it for its own opposite. But Lady Honoria, who missed nothing under heaven, watched the pair of them across the width of that room, and said nothing at all, and her old black eyes were very bright indeed. It was Lady Honoria who sent her up the tower, though Verena did not understand until long afterward that the old woman had known to the inch what she was doing. "There are some old books of mine in the observatory at the great house," she said, one grey afternoon, "that I have wanted these 10 years. My great-nephew is from home today, gone down the valley and not back before dark. Go across and up and fetch them down to me. The housekeeper will let you in. No one else goes up to that room now. You need not fear meeting a soul upon the stairs." So Verena crossed the half-mile of park, was let in at a side door by a kind and incurious housekeeper, and climbed the long, cold, winding stair alone, with her heart beating hard for reasons she did not care to examine too closely. The observatory at the top was round and full of gray light and bitterly cold, and the instant she stepped into it, she stopped as though she had walked bodily into a wall. She knew this room, not its walls, which were strange to her, nor the fine instruments ranged along them, nor the great gleaming telescope beneath the slotted dome, but set a little apart by the northern window, upon a stand plainly made on purpose to receive it, clean and careful and exactly placed, there stood another telescope, an older one, a smaller one, a shabby, worn, beloved, unmistakable one, with a long scratch down its brass barrel that she herself had made at the age of 11 and been forgiven for. It was her father's. It was the telescope from the tower at Larkfield, the one that had been sold off with all the rest of their lives out of the wreck, to whatever stranger would put down money for it. And it was not the only thing. Pinned upon the wall beside the stand, set plainly in a frame, hung a few printed pages she knew as well as she knew her own hand, for she had helped to copy the fair draft of them by candlelight in the summer she was 17. It was her father's paper upon the motion of his comet, the very paper that had first brought the Duke of Eldermere to Larkfield and to her. Its margins were dark with notes in a small, exact, upright hand. Read and read again until the paper had worn soft at every fold. Verena stood in the cold, round room and looked at the thing that could not possibly be there, and the whole long year of telling herself she had imagined his glance came apart quietly in her hands. He had not forgotten. A man does not seek out and buy, from the ruin of a stranger's home, the one poor shabby telescope of a man he cannot remember. He had known whose it was, and hunted it down through the sale, and carried it all this way north, into the single room in his house he could no longer bring himself to enter, and set it with his own hands by the window, and left it there. And then he had stood in his own hall, and looked full into her face, and told her he did not know what summer she meant. He remembered. He remembered every hour of it, exactly as she did, as he remembered every other thing that had ever happened to him in his life, which meant that each word he had spoken to break her. He had spoken knowing it for a lie, and had chosen to speak it, and had known to the farthing what it would cost her when he did. Verena sank down upon the cold step beneath the window, her father's telescope at her shoulder, and could not have said whether the thing rising in her was fury or grief or some terrible and unwanted hope. She knew only that the question had changed shape entirely. For a whole year she had lain awake, asking how he could possibly have forgotten her. Now she would have to ask a far worse one. Not how a man might forget the woman he had promised to wed, but why a man who forgot nothing at all would choose with his eyes wide open to break her on purpose and call it forgetting. She should have gone straight down to Lady Honoria with the books and said nothing at all. Instead, Verena stayed in the cold, round room until the last of the light failed, and then she did a reckless thing. She did not light a lamp. She opened the shutter above the great telescope, as her father had taught her to do 100 times, and she put her eye to the glass, and she found low in the eastern dark the first bright star of the evening. Vega. It was always Vega. She never heard him come up. She would never learn how long he had stood in the doorway before he spoke. "You should not be here," said the Duke of Eldermere. She did not take her eye from the glass. "I was sent up for the books," she said. "I stayed for the sky. You may tell your aunt I trespassed, if it pleases you. It will hardly be the worst thing I am said to have done this year." He came into the room. In the dark she could not see his face, only the shape of him against the faint gray of the window, and she thought that perhaps the dark made it easier for them both, as the dark had once made everything easier, a long time ago, in another tower, in another life. "Name the one above it," she said suddenly, not knowing why she said it except that once it had been their whole private language. the small one there, at the shoulder of the greater. There was a long silence. She was certain he would not answer. She was certain he would turn on his heel and go and leave her alone to the cold. Then, very low, out of the dark, he named it, and the next when she asked, and the one below that. Star by star he gave them back to her, in that quiet, exact voice, the whole northern sky they had learned together across 3 summers. She asked him for the faint chain of stars her father had called the river, and he named every link of it without a pause. She asked for the small, dim cluster near the horizon that was hardest of all to find, and he named that too, and told her, as her father once had, that it lay farther off than thought could travel, and that its light had set out toward this cold room long before either of them was born. Verena stood with her hand upon her father's telescope and her face wet in the dark, and understood that this, at the least, he could not pretend to have forgotten. A man may deny a promise before witnesses. He cannot in an unlit room forget the name of every star in heaven and give them back one by one to the only soul he ever named them for. When the sky was named out, he stopped, and the silence came back, heavier than before. "Why?" she said into it. She did not need to say more than the single word. For a moment she felt him waver. She felt the whole cold structure of him lean toward speech, and her heart stood still with hoping. Then he stepped back. "Go down to my aunt," he said, and his voice had gone flat and final once more. "And Verena, whatever you believe you have found in this room, let it lie. There are things it is far safer not to understand. If you have any care left for your own safety or for your sister's, you will ask me nothing, and you will keep well away from me, and you will be glad one day that I let you go." He was gone before she could shape an answer, and she stood alone in the dark with the named stars and the one word he had not let her finish. And she understood only this, but she understood it to the marrow. He was not protecting himself. He was protecting her, and he was afraid. Verena did not sleep that night, and in the morning she went to Lady Honoria and asked her plainly what it was in the world that her great-nephew was so afraid of. The old woman set down her book and looked at her for a long moment. "I wondered," she said, "how long it would take you to come and ask me that to my face." "Sit. I will tell you what I know," she said when Verena had sat, "and what I have guessed, and you may make of the whole what you can. I know that Lucian came back from the year of his father's death an altered man. The old Duke was a hard and secret creature, close as a locked box, and he died, leaving my great-nephew something. Not debt. The estate is sound. He left him a thing I've never seen and can only guess at. Some old wrong, done long ago and buried deep, of the kind that great houses bury and then spend a generation praying will stay in the ground. I saw the change come over him the week he took the title," she went on. "I had thought it would be grief, but grief bows a man, and this straightened him, and hollowed him, and set a guard behind his eyes that has never once come down since, not for me, not for anyone living. I have watched him 3 years hold himself like a man carrying a brimful cup across a crowded room, in terror of the one step that spills it. I did not know the name of the cup until the smiling man began to call. Now I believe I do. And I know this besides, that within a month of your father's ruin, and of your own, a certain man began to come to Winclear, the Duke of Falstone. A smooth, cold, smiling creature, who comes when it suits him, and is received when no other soul would be, and who leaves my great-nephew gray in the face for a day after he is gone. I am old, Verena. I am not blind. Lucian is not a man who is ruled by anybody breathing, but that man rules him, and it began in the very season he cast you off. Verena sat very still while the pieces turned and settled into their places, one by one, like stars coming out. The promise, the denial before witnesses, her father's telescope bought out of the wreck of her home and hidden away in the one room its owner could no longer bear to enter. The named stars in the dark. Whatever you believe you have found, let it lie. your sister's safety. He did not stop loving me," she said slowly, and the saying of it aloud was almost more than she could bear. "He was made to give me up. That man made him do it. And to keep me safe, he let the whole of England believe him a liar and a monster, because a liar is a smaller and a safer thing to be than whatever the truth would cost." The grief of the whole past year turned over in her and showed its other face. Every cold doorstep, every folded letter of character handed back, every hungry night in the room above the chandler's shop, she had borne them all, believing herself forgotten by the one man on earth who could not forget. And the whole of that while, he had been buying back her father's telescope out of the wreck of her home and hiding it in the dark and paying in silence and self-loathing for the single crime of having loved her. She did not know whether the thing rising in her chest was fury at what had been done to them both, or a grief that had no floor to it, or, worst and most dangerous of all, hope. Lady Honoria did not answer at once. When she did, her voice had lost all its briskness, and for the first time since Verena had known her, she sounded like what she was, which was a very old woman who was afraid. "There is a thing I have not told you," she said. "It is the truest reason I brought you here, though I told myself it was for your own sake and for the pleasure of your company. And those things were real enough as far as they went. The Duke of Falstone was here again 3 days before I came south to fetch you out of that cold room over the chandler's shop, and he asked after you, Verena, by your name. He knew already that Roland Ellery had left 2 daughters, and he asked where they had gone, and what had become of the elder, and whether she was handsome, and clever, and spoken for, and he asked it lightly, between one dish and the next, with that smile that never once reached his eyes. I did not like it. I have not been able to put it out of my mind from that hour to this. I thought if the girl is under my own roof, I can at the least see the danger when it comes. The room had gone very cold. "Why," said Verena, for the second time in as many days, and this time the fear stood plain and naked in the word. "Why should such a man trouble to ask after me at all?" "I do not know," said Lady Honoria, "but I have lived a long time in this world, and I have learned that when a man has broken a thing to get his way, and then comes back looking for the pieces, it is never once in 100 times to mend them." And even as she spoke there came, far off through the great house, the grind of a carriage upon the gravel, and the raised voice of a manservant framing the old formula of welcome, and a name was carried up the stair to them that turned the blood in Verena's body to cold water. The Duke of Falstone was come again to Winclear. He was not at all what she had made ready for. She had built, in the little time she had been given, a picture of a villain, and the Duke of Falstone was nothing so simple or so useful as that. He was perhaps 50 years of age, silver and elegant and beautifully made, with a warm and easy voice, and a smile that reached into every part of his face except his eyes, which were pale and patient and entirely without warmth. He rose when she came into the room and bowed over her hand as though she were a duchess, and not a companion in a made-over gown, and told her how very glad he was to meet, at the last, the daughter of so distinguished a man of science as the late Sir Roland Ellery. At the word distinguished, spoken so gently of her ruined and slandered father, Verena understood that he knew to the letter what he was doing, and that he wished, above all things, for her to know it too. Lucian stood by the window through the whole of it, and said almost nothing, and Verena did not once let herself look at him, for she had understood in a single breath the shape of the game, and the part that had fallen to her in it. Falstone had come to take her measure, to learn what she knew, to see whether the Duke of Eldermere had broken at last, and told her everything, whether the ruined girl was now a danger to him, or remained only a pawn to be moved about the board at his pleasure. And so Verena, who one day before had wanted nothing on earth but to fling the whole burning truth into the Duke of Eldermere's face, now bent herself to the work of protecting him, with the only weapon she had, which was to appear to know nothing at all. She was a full year in the hard school of ruin, and it had taught her, if nothing else, how to hold her face still while her heart came apart behind it. She had learned it upon 100 cold doorsteps, under 100 pitying looks. She turned that hard-won stillness now to the single use that mattered more than her life. She was pleasant and empty and just a little dull. She spoke of the weather and of the shocking state of the northern roads and of Lady Honoria's cats, and when he probed, as he did, delicately again and again, she gave him nothing at all to close his hand upon. First, he asked with tender concern whether the loss of her dear father still weighed upon her, and she said that time was a great healer, and looked mildly sad. He wondered aloud, watching her closely, whether she ever thought upon that unhappy business of a year past, the sad misunderstanding at this very house. And Verena looked politely blank and said she was sure she did not know what business he could mean, and reached with a perfectly steady hand. She let the Duke of Falstone look, and find nothing behind her eyes at all, and she felt, rather than saw, the tightness go slowly out of the man standing at the window. And she thought, with a grief that astonished her, this is the thing that he did for me, for a whole year, before the eyes of the world, and now at last I know its bitter taste in my own mouth. At the last, rising to take his leave, the Duke of Falstone turned to her with his warm and dreadful smile. "I find myself quite charmed," he said, "by this corner of the country, Lady Honoria. I believe I shall take Harcourt, the empty house across the valley yonder, for the season. It has stood shut up too long, and I have taken a sudden fancy to be neighborly." He spoke to Lady Honoria, but he did not look at her as he said it. He looked instead at Verena, full and slow, and then he turned that same unhurried look upon the Duke of Eldermere at the window. "I should so like," he said softly, "to further my acquaintance with the whole of your charming household." And Verena saw the Duke of Eldermere's hand close white and hard upon the sill of the window, and she understood that a threat had just been spoken aloud and answered, and that she had not been meant to understand a word of it, and that she had understood every syllable. When at last he was gone, the room let out its held breath all at once. Lady Honoria said something exceedingly sharp about jumped-up smiling snakes and the houses that receive them. But Lucian crossed the room to Verena, and for the first time in more than a year, he looked at her full in the face, and there was no mask upon him anywhere at all, only a naked and desperate fear. "What did you do just now?" he said very low, so that his aunt might not hear. "You made yourself small and stupid and empty in front of that man. I watched you do it. Tell me why you did that." "Because you did it first," said Verena, "for me." And the Duke of Eldermere, the man who in all his life had never once forgotten anything, looked at her as though she had struck him a blow over the heart, and for a long moment he could not find a single word to say. The Duke of Falstone took Harcourt within the week, and opened the shut-up house, and filled it with servants, and made himself, exactly as he had promised, a neighbor. And Verena learned what it was to be hunted by a patient man. He did nothing that anyone could name. He called, correctly, upon Lady Honoria, and was correctly received. He sent up baskets of hothouse fruit that Verena would not touch, and once a length of grey silk exactly the color of her eyes, which frightened her more than any open threat could have, for it meant he had looked at her long enough to learn the color of her eyes. He appeared, as though by chance, upon the paths where she walked, and fell into step, and spoke pleasantly of nothing for a mile together, until she understood there was no chance anywhere in him, that the pleasant nothing was itself the message, and she stopped walking out at all. He was in no hurry. That was the worst of him. A man in a hurry may sometimes be outrun. A patient man only waits and lets you tire yourself, and is there at the turning of the path when you do. And at the last, on a still bright morning, he found her alone. She had gone only as far as the little bridge at the foot of the park, and he was there before her upon it, as though he had always been going to be, and there was no one within call. And she knew that the thing had come. He did not trouble, now that they were alone, to keep the warmth in his voice. It fell away from him like a cloak set down, and what was left underneath was cold and level and almost courteous in its cruelty. "I will not waste your morning, Miss Ellery," he said, "for you are a clever young woman, and I dislike watching a clever creature pretend to be a simple one. You know a part of it. Let me give you the rest, so that we may deal plainly, you and I." And he told her. He told it lightly, leaning upon the rail of the bridge as though he spoke of the weather. He told her that her father had not been ruined by any common swindle, that the smiling man of business who had come into Sir Rowland's gentle life with a scheme that could not fail had been his own creature, sent for the purpose, and that the ruin of the Ellerys had been made deliberately and with care, as a carpenter makes a chair. He told her that he held, in a lawyer's strongbox far from that quiet valley, papers in her dead father's own trusting hand, letters and figures and receipts, arranged now with such art that they would not read as the folly of an honest and unworldly man at all, but as the cold and deliberate fraud of a thief who had gulled his friends and neighbors out of their savings and pocketed the whole. "One word for me," he said, "and a single delivery to the right office, and your father is no longer a pitied fool in an unmarked grave. He is a felon, his estate pursued for what was taken, his living daughters, the daughters of a proven swindler, with all that must follow. Your sister is 15, I believe, and in Bath. It would follow her the whole length of her life, into every room she ever tried to enter. You know that it would, for you have lived inside it this year. I am offering to lift it clean away, or to make it 1,000 times the heavier. The choice, in the end, will be yours." Verena stood on the bridge and did not move, and did not weep, and counted her own heartbeats to keep from falling. "And there is Eldermere," he went on, softer still, "our proud, silent Duke. He carries a thing for me, a small thing, a matter of his sainted fathers, that would end his house forever, were it ever to see the light. He gave you up at my asking, before witnesses, as neat as you please, and I confess I did not think he had it in him. But I am a careful man, Miss Ellery, and I have found that a secret shared with one frightened man is only ever half secured. I should like it better secured. I should like it bound up in a thing that cannot come undone." He looked at her then full, with his pale, unhurried eyes. "Marry me," he said. "That is my whole meaning, laid out plain upon the rail of this pretty bridge. Marry me, and become a duchess, and wear my name, and be forever the near and wholly dependent connection of the very man who holds Eldermere's life in the palm of his hand, so that your silent Duke can never again so much as think of moving against me without ruining his own wife in the same breath and the selfsame hour. You would be the lock upon the door I have kept shut these 20 years, a living lock that eats and sleeps and is grateful and can never once be picked. Do that, and I will settle your sister for life, and restore your father's good name with a word, and let your silent Duke keep his secret and his house until he dies of old age. Refuse me, and I will hang the name of Ellery, and break your sister, and pull down the house of Eldermere stone by stone. And I will do it, Miss Ellery, before the leaves are off the trees. You have until the end of the month to give me your answer, though I think, being clever, you have already given it." And he bowed to her, correct and cold, as though he had proposed a turn about the garden and not the sale of the rest of her life, and walked away up the path with an unhurried step, and left her standing alone upon the little bridge above the frozen stream, with the whole weight of 3 lives, her sister's and her father's memory, and the man she loved, laid quietly and exactly across her shoulders where he had known from the first hour it would fall. She told no one for 2 days. She turned it, and there was no side to it that was not the same. If she refused him, 3 people fell. Her sister, who had done nothing in this world but be born an Ellery. Lucian, who had already given up everything to keep her safe, and whose sacrifice would then have bought exactly nothing. And her father's memory, the last of her father left in the world to save. If she consented, only 1 person fell, and it was the one whose fall was hers alone to choose. It was not in the end a hard sum. It only felt as though it would kill her, which was a very different thing from being hard. She thought of her mother, dead these 6 years, who had once told her that a woman's life was mostly made of the things she gave up quietly, so that other people need never know the cost of them. She had not understood it then. She understood it, now, to the marrow. She thought of Perdita at 15 with her whole life still a door not yet opened, and of what it would be to know she had shut that door herself to spare her own heart. She thought of Lucien, who had done this very sum a year before alone, and come to the same answer, and paid it without once asking to be thanked or even known. And when she had thought of every one of them, and turned the sum over until no corner of it was left unexamined, she found she had known the answer since the bridge, and had only been letting herself grieve it before she spoke it aloud. So she went to the Duke of Falstone at Harcourt, and she told him yes, and she watched the small cold satisfaction move behind his eyes, and she came away feeling as though she had signed her name at the bottom of a page she could not read. The thing was given out within the week. The Duke of Falstone was to marry the elder Miss Ellery, of the ruined Ellerys, and was, in his great generosity, to see the poor slandered family's name restored. The world, which had named her a liar and a fortune hunter 1 year before, now decided it had always known there was good blood there, and began, sickeningly, to be kind to her. The same doors that had shut in her face a year before swung open now, and women who had crossed the street sooner than know her pressed her hand and told her how they had always felt for her, always in their secret hearts. She received them with a still and pleasant face, and hated none of them, and felt herself becoming day upon day exactly the empty and grateful thing the Duke of Falstone required her to be, as though the marriage had already begun long before a word of it was said in a church. Lucien came to her the night. The news reached Winclear. He did not knock. He came into Lady Honoria's small, warm parlor, white to the lips, and Lady Honoria took one look at the pair of them, and rose without a word, and went out and shut the door, which she had never once done before. "You will not do this," he said. His voice shook. "I forbid it. Do you hear me? I would sooner pull my own house down with my own 2 hands than let you walk into that man's keeping to save it. Verena, you cannot think I would purchase Eldermere at such a price. There is no stone of it worth 1 hour of you." And there it was, the whole terrible symmetry of it, laid bare between them in the firelight. "I know you would not," she said. "That is precisely why the choosing cannot be left to you. You gave me up to save me, and you never once asked my leave to do it. You decided alone that your suffering was a fair price for my safety, and you paid it without a word. Well, now it is my turn to decide what my suffering is worth and to whom, and you will not take that from me, because you, above every man alive, have no right to. You taught me how this thing is done. I learned it at your own hands, watching you do it to me. Do not stand there now and tell me. The lesson was only ever meant to run the one way." He had no answer to that. She watched him search for one, and failed to find it. She had never in her life seen him without a word ready. The man who forgot nothing, who had a fact laid by for every question ever asked him. And the sight of him now, silenced and undone, was very nearly more than she could bear and still hold to her resolve. He turned away from her to the fire, and she saw his shoulders move. Once, and she understood that the Duke of Eldermere, who forgot nothing, and who had not wept in front of another living soul since he was a boy, was weeping now. "Do not," he said very low, "do not be as great a fool as I was." But she only came and stood beside him at the fire, not touching him, and said nothing more, because the wedding was set now, for the last morning of the month, in the cold little church at the foot of the valley, and there was nothing left in the world for either of them to do but let it come. He came to her once more, 3 nights before the wedding, and this time he told her everything. They walked out together into the park in the dark, because a house has ears and the open dark has none, and above them the whole winter sky stood hard and bright and indifferent, and he told her the thing his father had left him, his eyes upon the frozen ground. Years ago, when Lucian was a boy, the old Duke of Eldermere had stood upon the edge of ruin, and to save himself he had done a wicked thing. He had put his own crime, a matter of forged names and stolen money, upon the shoulders of an innocent man, a young clerk named Hale, who had trusted him. Hale had been believed guilty, for who would take a clerk's word against a duke's, and had been transported across the world, and had died there, far from everyone he loved, for a thing he had never done. The old duke had buried the proof of it deep, and had never once spoken of it, and had lived out his long years in comfort and in honor, and had died at the last in his own bed with his own family gathered about him, which was a piece he had stolen from another man as surely as he had stolen the money. And a younger man named Falstone, who had been clever and near and useful at the time, and who had helped a little in the burying, had quietly kept back for himself a copy of the one paper that told the whole tale, and had said nothing, and had waited, patient as the grave itself, through all the long years it took for the hard old duke to die and the son to come into both the title and the sin together. I was 22, Lucian said, when he first put it into my hands, on the very day we buried my father. He did it kindly. That is the part I have never been able to forgive him. He was kind about it. So I have known, since that day, that I sit in a stolen chair, and that a good man died in chains so that I might. I cannot give you what it has been, to carry that, and to smile, and to be called Your Grace. And when Falstone came to me a year ago and named his price, and his price was you, I told myself that at the least I could keep this one clean thing from being dragged into the filth of it. I could keep you out. So I stood in my own hall, and I looked at your face which I had loved better than my life, and I said, the cruelest thing I have ever said or will say, and I watched you break, and it was the nearest I have ever come to dying. I remember it, Verena, he said. And at last he stopped walking upon the frozen path, and turned to her under the hard, bright stars. I remember every word of our promise. I have never lost a single syllable of it, waking or sleeping, across the whole year I spent making you believe I had lost the lot. I could not forget it if I begged God on my knees to be allowed. I remember the exact cold of the tower that last night, and the smell of the lamp oil, and the sound your father made snoring 2 floors beneath us, and the way you laughed at it into my shoulder. I marked the star for you with my own hand, and I gave you the card, and I told you that whatever came I would marry you, and I meant it that night with the whole of my soul, and I mean it now. This very minute, 3 nights before, I must sit in a church and watch you given over to that man and say nothing at all. I forget nothing. It is my curse, and it is the one gift I have left to give you. I will remember this too. However far apart they send us, I will carry every hour of you, entire and undimmed, until the day I die. That is the only faithfulness left that he cannot take from me. Verena stood and wept in the cold, and did not tell him to stop, and she did not tell him either, the thing that had begun, very quietly, to move in the back of her own mind. That a secret shared with one frightened man is only half secured, Falstone himself had said, but a secret told aloud, freely, by the very man it shames, before the whole world at once, is no longer a secret at all, and a weapon that has been fired cannot be fired again. She said nothing of it, for it was not yet a plan, only the faint far edge of one, the way a light shows at the rim of the sky an hour before the dawn it promises. She only took his hand in the dark the first time she had let herself touch him in more than a year, and held it hard, and felt his fingers close over hers as though she were the one solid thing left standing in a falling world. And above them the old light of the stars came down upon them both, faithful and terrible and entirely without mercy. Whatever happens, she said at the last, very low, whatever happens in that church, do not be sorry that you told me the truth tonight. It is the only wedding gift I am to have that is worth the keeping. The last morning of the month came up gray, and still, with a hard frost on the grass. It was a small church, and a plain one, gray stone and cold flags, with a single high window behind the altar, through which the frost-white morning fell in one hard, clean bar of light. Verena had asked, without any real hope, that it be held here, in the little valley church, and not at the great fashionable one in the town, and Falstone had granted it at once, with his smile, for a small, cold country church, filled with the very people who had watched her fall, made a finer stage for his triumph than any cathedral. He understood, as she was forever learning, the exact cruelty of a familiar place. The county filled the cold pews to see the ruined Ellery girl made a duchess, and they did not come for kindness. They came as people come to see a thing put right, that they had enjoyed seeing put wrong, and they whispered and they waited. She came up the aisle on the arm of Lady Honoria Stuart, for she had no man of her own left living to give her away, in a gown that Falstone's money had bought, and that did not feel in the least like hers, and every single step of it was the longest she had ever walked. She kept her eyes fixed ahead of her. She had learned upon the doorsteps how to keep her eyes ahead. At the top of it the Duke of Falstone waited for her, silver and smiling, and to one side, in the front pew, where the family of the groom's particular friends might sit, sat the Duke of Eldamere. He had come. Of course he had come. Falstone had required it of him, as the final turn of the screw, that Lucian sit and watch with his own eyes the woman he loved given over into the keeping of his master, and make no sound, and afterward wish him joy. That was the whole of Falstone's art. He wanted the man who never forgot to have this morning to remember forever. And so Lucian sat in the front pew, white and still as a thing carved upon a tomb, and watched her come. He had promised to be there, and Lucian, being Lucian, would keep even a promise torn out of him by a devil, which was the whole tragedy of the man in a single fact. Verena looked at him once, only once, the whole cold length of the church between them, and into that one look she tried to pour a year of it, the tower and the stars and his hand closing over hers upon the frozen path, so that if this were the last free look ever to pass between them, it should carry the whole weight of what they had been. Then she made herself look away, and took her place beside the Duke of Falstone at the rail, and the parson opened his book, and began. Falstone stood beside her, warm and silver and content, a man watching the last lock click shut upon a door he had held 20 years. He did not once look at her. He looked only at Lucian. That was his pleasure, and had always been his pleasure. The old grave words went on, over the coughing and shifting of the cold crowd, and Verena heard them as though from under water. The parson came at last to the place where he must ask it, whether any man there present knew of any just cause or impediment why these two should not be joined, and bid him now speak, or forever after hold his peace. Verena drew in her breath. She had meant to be the one to speak. She had worked it out on the frozen path 3 nights before, that a secret told aloud by the very man it shames is a secret no longer, and she had come to this altar quietly resolved to stand up herself, in this exact and only silence, and tell the whole church what had been done to her father and to the man she loved, and take the ruin of it onto her own shoulders, and so set Lucian free whether he willed it or not. She was too slow. Into that little silence there came a single sound, the sound of a man rising to his feet, unhurried, deliberate, the scrape of a boot on cold stone, loud as a shot in the waiting quiet. The Duke of Eldamere stood up. The whole church turned as one, 100 cold faces swinging toward the front pew, and Verena saw, in the half-second before Lucian spoke, the pale, unhurried eyes of the Duke of Falstone go, for the first time since she had known him, wide with something almost like fear, for he had built his whole life upon the certain knowledge that this one man would rather die than speak, and the man was speaking. "I know a just cause," said the Duke of Eldamere. His voice was not loud, and did not need to be. It carried into every cold corner of that church like a stone dropped into a still pool. I know a great many just causes, and I find, this morning, that I have at last grown too tired to hold my peace. He did not look at Falstone. He looked only at Verena. "I will tell you all a story," he said to the whole staring church. And it is a true one, for I have never been able to forget a single fact of it, however I have wished to. It is the story of how the House of Eldermere came by its good name, and of the innocent man who paid for it, and of the man at this rail beside this lady, who has spent 20 years growing fat upon the buried proof of it. And then, in that quiet exact voice, before the county and the parson and God, the man who forgot nothing told everything. He told of his father, the old Duke of Eldermere, whom half the grey heads in that church had known, and bowed to, and called a great man. He told of the year the estate had stood upon the very edge of ruin, and of the forged names, and the money moved in the dark, and the ledgers made to lie. Pacte. He told of a young clerk called Nathaniel Hale, 24 years of age, with a wife and 2 small children and a trusting heart, who had carried his master's papers without ever once thinking to read them for treachery, and who had stood in a dock and heard himself named a thief in the very voice he had served, while that great man sat grave and sorrowful in the gallery above him, and said not one word to save him. Hale had been carried across the width of the world in irons, and had died there within 3 years of fever and of grief, far from every soul he loved. His name never cleared. His 2 children left to grow up the children of a convicted felon, for a crime a duke had done and let another man carry into the ground. He named the dates. He named the sums, to the shilling. He named the 2 false witnesses who were still living, and turned his head, and found one of them, an old man now, gone grey and trembling in a pew near the back, and looked at him steadily until the old man put his face into his hands. And then, in a voice that filled the church to its cold rafters, the man who had never in his life let go of a single thing recited, word for word, the entire text of a document his father had believed burned to ash 30 years before, the full confession, in the old duke's own hand, every line of it, from memory alone, because he had read it once at 22, and carried every letter of it within him ever since. And when the reciting was done, he told the church exactly where the one surviving copy of that paper might be found, and in whose strongbox and by whose hand it had been kept these 20 years to make dukes and magistrates and honest frightened men dance. And then he turned, at last, to the Duke of Falstone. "You told me once," he said, "that a secret shared with one frightened man is only half secured. You were right. You were always the cleverer of us in the small things. But you made one error, the error of every man who has ever held a whip over another. You believed I feared the fall of my house above anything else in the world, and for a year, God forgive me, you were correct. But you asked too much when you asked for her. You reached for the one thing I would burn the whole of Eldermere to keep from your hands, and so I have burned it. You are holding a knife to a house that is already ash. Your secret is told. Your proof proves only that you have hidden a murder these 20 years for your own profit. There is nothing left in your hand at all." The church had risen into an uproar, but Lucian raised his voice over it, and for the first time it was loud, and it filled the place to the rafters. "Sir Rowland Ellery was ruined by that man," he said, pointing, and the whole church followed his hand. "Ruined on purpose, by a hired creature, to make a lever of his daughters. I have the proof of that also, gathered quietly this year past while he believed me broken, and lodged already with men who cannot be frightened and cannot be bought. Sir Rowland was an honest man, and a good one, and he died of a lie, and I am here this morning to call it a lie before all of you, so that not one soul in this county may ever say otherwise and be believed." Verena stood at the rail with her hand pressed to her mouth, and the church roared, and the Duke of Falstone had gone the color of ash, one hand out to the rail as though the very floor had shifted under him, saying something low and fast about slander, and madness, and the honor of a peer of the realm. That not one soul in that church was any longer troubling to hear. The county had smelled which way the wind had turned, as the county always did, and a low sound moved through the cold pews, not quite a murmur and not yet a roar, the sound of 100 people who had come to enjoy one thing and discovered, to their far greater delight, that they were to be given a better, and through all of it Lucian looked only at her. "I have kept my peace a year," he said to her, quietly now under the noise, as though there were no one in the church but the two of them. "I find I cannot keep it one moment longer. I told you once under the stars that I would marry you whatever came. It has taken me a year and the ruin of my house to be worthy of that promise again. I do not ask you to keep yours. I ask only that you not keep his." And Verena Ellery, before the whole staring county, turned from the Duke of Falstone at the rail, and walked back down the long aisle to the front pew where Lucian stood, and put her hand in his, and did not let it go. The fall of the Duke of Falstone was a long and thorough thing, and not, in truth, the part of the story worth the telling. It is enough to say that a man who has held a buried crime over a great house for 20 years has made, in that same time, a great many other enemies, men he had bent and frightened and quietly bled, who had lacked all the while only the courage to move first. When Eldermere stood up in a cold church and took the fear out of the air at a single stroke, telling his own worst secret aloud before ever he could be threatened with it, those men found their courage all together and in the same hour. And the proof Lucian had gathered through the year of his seeming ruin went out into the hands of men who could not be bought and would not be cowed. Falstone did not hang, being a duke, but he went abroad beneath a cloud that would never lift and did not come back, and his name became a thing said quietly and with a small shudder, and was accounted by all who knew the whole of it a great deal less than he had earned. Sir Rowland Ellery's name was cleared. It was done quietly and completely, and old friends who had crossed the street rather than know his daughter came now to press her hand, and Verena received them gently and forgave them, because her father would have, and because she had learned in her hard year that a heart kept warm is worth more than a heart kept even, and the memory of a young clerk named Hale, dead these many years on the far side of the world, was cleared also. Lucian saw to it himself, before he saw to anything else, before he thought of his own name or his own comfort. He found where Hale's people had come to, the son and the daughter of the man his father had destroyed, grown now and gone gray under a changed name in a distant town, and he went to them and stood in their small parlor and told them the whole truth to their faces. He asked their pardon, which they were not obliged to give, and did not, at the first asking, wholly give, and he gave back what could be given back, the name first, cleared in the very courts that had once condemned it, and then the greater part of what the scandal had left him, which was not enough, and was never in this world going to be enough, and was at the last all that one living man could do for the children of a dead one. He counted it the best day's work of his life, and he said once that he had sat in a stolen chair for 22 years, and found he could stand very comfortably instead. The house of Eldermere did not fall, quite, in the end. It was humbled and lightened, and the proud silence went out of it, and what was left was a smaller and poorer and infinitely warmer thing than it had been. Lady Honoria said it was the making of him, and that his father should have been exposed 30 years sooner, and that she meant to live to be 100 purely to enjoy the change, and everyone believed she would. As for Verena, and the man who had burned his own house to the ground sooner than let her go, once the great noise of the world had died away, there was only one thing left for them to do, and they were in no hurry now to do it, having learned the hard worth of a promise kept slowly and in the open. They were married in the spring, in the same little church at the foot of the valley, with almost no one there, which was exactly as they both wished it. There was no county come to watch a thing put right or wrong. There was only Lady Honoria, fierce and upright in the front pew, and Perdita safe and 16 and openly crying, and a handful of people who had earned the right to be glad. He gave her no jewels. On the morning of the wedding, he gave her, instead, a small square of card, worn soft and pale at its folds, the twin of the one she had carried in her glove for 2 long years. He had drawn it new, in his own exact upright hand, a map of the summer sky, with one star marked upon it, brighter than the rest. "You kept yours," he said, "through all of it, through the cold room over the chandler's shop when you were hungry enough to sell it. I know because I know you. I wanted you to have one from me that was not a lie. This one I mean to keep." That night, when the small, glad day was over, he took her up the winding stair of the tower at Winclear, into the round room he had not been able to enter for a year, where her father's telescope stood clean and waiting by the northern window. And he opened the shutter above the great glass, and together they found, low in the spring dark, the first bright star of the evening. Vega. It was always Vega. Verena thought, standing there with his arm about her, and the old light coming down, of the thing her father had taught her as a child, that the light of a star is old light, that it travels across such a gulf of years that the star may be long changed or gone by the time the light arrives, and that to look up at the night sky is to look at a great faithful keeping of promises made in the unimaginable past and honored, without fail, on this exact night, over the heads of people who have long forgotten how to keep anything at all. The world below had forgotten her once, and then remembered her when it was convenient, and would no doubt forget her again, for that is the way of the world below. But the man beside her would not forget her, could not, had never for 1 hour been able to. He had carried every word of a promise made under a summer star through a year of ruin and a morning of fire, and had burned down his own house sooner than break it. And here they stood beneath that same star at the last, and it was still faithful, and so was he. Some promises are made of words, and words are cheap, and the world unsays them by the thousand every winter. But a very few are made of something older and harder and truer, the way starlight is made, and those ones keep. Those ones cross whatever distance they must, however dark, however long, and they arrive. Hers had arrived. She turned her face up to it, and to him, and she was home.